Lesson 2, the planting of English America. And it'll help if, and you can go ahead and get going there. All right. So what we see here is a sketch of the original fort at Jamestown. We're not going to get into Jamestown until our next lesson. Highly recommend, if you haven't been to Jamestown in a while, you should head down there. The museum and the Living Cultural Center down there is really amazing. Anybody been to Jamestown recently? Nice.
Oh, not recently.
Not recently. They've done a lot of really cool things down in Jamestown. So, well worth your time. Check it out. It's really impressive. All right, so what we're looking at is England at home and England overseas during this early colonial period. So England's first claims in the New World will be laid right after the voyage, the first couple of voyages of Columbus. King Henry VII of the House of Tudor hires an Italian explorer by the name of Giovanni Caboto, better known to us as John Cabot. He will set out for a northwest passage, basically what is above Maine, right? And present day, like Newfoundland. So this is the area in which the Vikings had landed in the late 900s. And that's where he sets out. He'll land there. He'll lay this claim, pretty much everything from about Maine all the way down to Georgia and across to the Pacific. That's what England lays down as a land claim. He also discovers water teeming with fish, notably what very profitable fish that the English are going to make a lot of money off of later. And salmon's a good guess, but I'm looking for tuna's a really good guess. Tuna, yes. Trout, these are all good guesses. It starts with a C. Cod. It's cod. Very good. Did you say cod? I'm so sorry. Excellent job. Cod. Yeah, lots and lots of cod, but a lot of other types of fish that are in the region. We call this the Grand Bank. This is going to be a very profitable fishing region for the British moving forward. So he goes back. He's hailed a hero, huzzah, John Cabot, go do your thing and keep on exploring. And then, we don't know what happens to John Cabot. He is probably lost at sea. Some historians claim that he pops up in history back in Italy, but he was probably lost at sea. We don't need to split those hairs right now because the bottom line is, sorry about your loss, John Cabot. Now England has land claims. But they don't really follow up on them for quite some time because when King Henry VIII comes to power and takes control of the throne, as we may remember from the past, he's got a little bit of marital issues, right? Familiar with the 6 wives? Do I have any 6 fans in the house? Hey. All right. So, this ultimately leads to, there's a massive military buildup under his reign. There's a massive naval buildup under his reign. There's a huge population boom in England, but a lot of his time is consumed with breaking from the Catholic Church and the formation of the Anglican Church of England, which coincides with other parts of the Protestant Reformation that are happening during this era. Any questions up to this point? All right, so we have John Cabot on the left. This is the area here that Cabot would have explored. And this area up here is Newfoundland, and that is the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So this is where the Vikings had already landed before. And potentially St. Brendan. All right, England's imperial stirrings. So as we move out of the Henry VIII era and we move into the Elizabethan era, Spain is still dominating the scene. They have most of the land claims. Obviously, Portugal has a pretty big foothold in Brazil and parts of the Caribbean. But Spain has the lion's share of the land at this point. And they are creeping up into North America, settlement in St. Augustine, settlement out in Santa Fe, New Mexico, right? France is also exploring by this time. Their explorations had started in the early 1500s and continued into the mid 1500s. And now they're laying claim to land in what is present day Canada and ultimately the Mississippi River Valley. They're going to stake a claim and ultimately establish the trading post city of Quebec. England's first attempt that I'm going to talk about in more detail is going to be Roanoke Island in present-day Outer Banks in North Carolina. However, this does not go well, and I'll talk about that in great detail a little bit deeper into the lesson. The slow approach to colonization and following up on Cabot's claims really kind of came down to Henry VIII. Henry VII was interested in an age of exploration. Henry VIII, not so much, all right? It was conflict in Europe with competing nations. It was a fight with the Pope over divorce and annulment. It was what led to the establishment of the Anglican Church of England. And it's kind of interesting, too, because when you think about the Anglican Church of England, what is that church now? Does anybody know? Has anybody ever heard of the Episcopal Church before? Yeah, that's it. And if you were to go to like an Episcopal service or wedding or funeral, there are a lot of similarities to the same as like a Catholic Mass or a Catholic wedding or a Catholic funeral. There are a lot of similarities. So it's not like the Anglicans got rid of all the rite and ritual that the Catholics had. So Henry VIII dies, and then you have this weird sort of succession to the throne, right? He had 6 wives, he has multiple children, everybody's jockeying for control of the throne. The first heir that sits on the throne is Edward VI, but then Edward dies of tuberculosis. And then his mother, Jane Seymour, she tries to ascend to the throne, but then daughter Mary, the first, daughter to Henry and Catherine of Aragon, she ascends the throne. She's better known to us as what? Bloody Mary. Very good. Nice job. Because she wants to reinstate England back to Catholicism. And then once she dies, probably of influenza, that's they speculate that that's probably what she died of. That's when Anne Boleyn's daughter and Henry's daughter, Elizabeth I, takes the throne and is totally committed to the Anglican Church of England and keeping the Anglican faith. So much so, she never marries, right? That's how we get the name of that massive chunk of land, right, that originally is our everything from like Maine down to Georgia, all the way to the Pacific, is named in honor of her. Virginia. She was the Virgin Queen, never married. And, obviously Virginia looks quite different now. But initially, Virginia was much of the entire continental U.S. in the minds of Britain. So she is the one that will allow for the first attempt at colonization. The guy that is going to lead this, more so financially, is going to be one of her trusted sea dogs, Sir Walter Raleigh. Raleigh is going to get the expedition going. ironically, Raleigh never steps foot in North Carolina. He was an explorer and a navigator and, a naval captain and all those things, and he did some other exploring across the Atlantic, but he never stepped foot in the Carolinas. That's how Virginia gets its name, but it is kind of ironic that North Carolina will adopt Raleigh's name for the capital. Never steps foot in North Carolina. After Elizabeth comes to power, she is going to broker a treaty with the Dutch called the Treaty of Nonsuch. This is actually really important for both England and Holland because now the Dutch independence is strengthened. Dutch trade power and their joint stock company, the Dutch East India Company, will gain a lot more authority due to this political and military alliance. All right. Now, during this period of time, as Elizabeth comes into power, relations with Spain are deteriorating, not just because of the religion, but also because on the high seas, what are the British doing to the Spanish? Killing them and robbing them of their gold and silver. So Spain's not happy about that. But Elizabeth's promoting it. We're actually going to talk about a pivotal moment of that promotion here momentarily. And I'm going to get to your question in like 1 second. But like the real event, though, the sort of series of events that ramp all this up are the Catholic uprisings that occur in Ireland, which were squashed with brutal warfare against the Irish. A lot of those soldiers that served in the wars against the Irish are going to pop back up again in Virginia to battle against the Powhatan. We'll talk more about that later. And then sort of the ultimate turning point is the execution of Mary Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's cousin, who was executed for an assassination attempt. That is when Spain will, in response, declare a holy war on England. And then this is where we see England's naval supremacy rise. And this is when Spain goes into decline. This war is not just a 1588 war. This war goes from 1588 to 1604. It's quite the stretch. Question?
Oh, I was just going to ask if this is when like the British naval fleet became like a big.
Totally. We're actually going to talk about that turning point today, and that turning point is called the Battle of Gravelines. Real quick, did you all ask for printed notes?
I've got one.
No, printed notes for the lesson.
Yes, I did.
Printed notes? And printed notes? Cool. All right. That was a good question. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in detail as we move forward. Okie dokie. There you go. So this is ultimately going to drop. Did you guys ask for notes by chance?
Yeah.
Cool. Did you ask for notes?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep, there you go. All right. Okay, so on the top left, we have King Henry VIII. On the top right, Elizabeth I, his daughter. Bottom left, Mary Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's cousin, who was executed. And then on the bottom right, that's King Philip II of Spain, which was interesting because he actually tried to court Elizabeth, but Elizabeth wasn't interested in marrying any of these monarchs who were also related to her because she didn't want to give up power, nor did she want to give up the Anglican Church of England. Yes. This guy, that's King Philip II of Spain. What I've provided you guys here, if you take a look, is just and we'll look at this map again when we go into lesson 3, because I'm going to talk more about the Protestant Reformation in lesson 3. This just kind of gives you a good idea of how things looked religiously in this era. So everything in gray is the Lutheran movement led by Martin Luther. Everything in pink is Roman Catholicism. Everything in this dark shade of navy blue, that's the Anglican Church of England, which was led by Henry VIII. This lighter Carolina blue, the sky shade of blue, that's Calvinist movement that we're going to talk more about in depth in lesson 3. And then in purple, we have the Orthodox Church. And then down as we move into the Middle East, Islam, the Muslim faith. All right. And then this was a coin that commemorated the British and Dutch alliance during the age of Elizabeth, brokered in 1585. Questions up to this point? All right, cool. So Elizabeth energizes England after Sir Francis Drake pirated Spanish ships and circumnavigated the globe. Elizabeth knighted him aboard his ship, the Golden Hind. This was like a slap in the face to Spain. Furthermore, he'll go on to become like the second in command of the British fleet against the Armada in 1588. He's one of the most interesting characters from this period. I mean, the guy was everywhere. It was pretty crazy. All the while, as we're ramping up toward war with Spain, Raleigh is negotiating with Elizabeth to get this land grant to explore and colonize. That will be established, and it'll start in 1584. It'll continue in 1585. There'll be a resurgence of it in 1587, but then it all falls apart. We'll talk more about that as we move into the next part of the lesson. The defeat of the Armada, the turning point battle of their defeat, is the Battle of Gravelines. Has anybody ever heard of that battle or learned of that battle before? This is where the Armada is defeated for a variety of reasons. Number one, the English fleet has been built up massively and armed to the teeth. Number two, they're fighting on home turf off the coast of England. Number three, weather is on their side. They're going to fight in a horrible gale that will take down much of the Armada. And number four, they're going to use a tactic that they picked up from the Dutch. The Dutch had used this tactic at Antwerp. It's called the Hellburner tactic. Has anyone ever heard of this before? Okay. This is when you load up a ship full of gunpowder and set it on fire and just let it cruise into a fleet of ships. Unmanned. The Hellburner was a pretty brutal tactic that worked in their favor. So victory over Spain will send England to new heights. Stronger government. Popular monarch is probably a little bit tricky. Certainly she's popular with the Anglicans and any of those Brits that were excited about the victory over Spain. The Catholics are still not a fan. More religious unity. This is really where we start to see the rise of the Anglican Church during her success in this war. A stronger sense of nationalism in England. But do keep in mind, she's the end of the House of Tudor. She has no children. Therefore, her nephew will ultimately become, not a nephew. Her cousin will become the next king of England, James I, the first of the House of Stuart, and he'll keep the Anglican Church going as well. So we'll talk more about him when we get into our next lesson. So, this is a golden age of literature. This is the era of Shakespeare, music, art, drama. The beginning of British sea dominance occurs during this period of time. Ultimately, the war, though, comes to an end in 1604 with the signing of the Treaty of London. And by the end of it, as previously stated, King Philip II and Spain are bankrupt. They're now into decline, and England is on the rise. All right. Top left, Sir Francis Drake, Elizabeth's most trusted and beloved sea dog. Top right, Sir Walter Raleigh, which, did they have a love interest? Maybe, probably not. He actually married one of her ladies in waiting without her consent. Created quite a stir. We'll talk more about the demise of Raleigh as we move forward in the lesson. Bottom left, William Shakespeare. Bottom right, that's one of Drake's man of wars that served against the Spanish Armada. And then this is a map that was sketched by the historian and artist on the Roanoke Island expedition. The first attempt, or rather, yeah, I guess you could go on the first attempt. It was sketched by John White. Question? They did. And he never stepped foot in North Carolina. But he was responsible for it. The settlement at Roanoke Island. Is the pace good? Is everybody good? Cool. All right. So let's talk about the lost colony. So in 1584, Raleigh will secure permission from Elizabeth to explore. He hires a group of explorers. Let's be clear though, Raleigh does not really have a joint stock company here. He's just got a group of investors that are like putting up money. It's not a Virginia Company of London situation. All right. Raleigh sends these explorers over, and they are going to land in the present day area of the Outer Banks. Where are my Outer Banks people at? You out there? You are probably familiar with two of the names I'm about to mention. Because what these explorers are going to do is they're going to bring back a bunch of plants, animals, Native American artifacts, and they're also going to bring back two very important Native Americans, Manio and Wanchese. All right? So they're going to bring them back to England. They learn English. They decide they're going to go back. They're going to establish permanent settlement. They go back the next year in 1585, but there's a problem. Rather than sending settlers in family units, they send a group of soldiers. Well, this isn't going to be a good look, right? Because they're loaded down with weapons. Their goal is to build a fort, which will become Fort Raleigh, that will be built on Roanoke Island. And when they get there, they are abandoned by Wanchese. And almost immediately, the relations with the natives are not good. And they're going to wind up at war with the natives. They don't have enough supply. They're starving. And lo and behold, on an expedition, stopping by to resupply the party, Sir Francis Drake. He shows up and is basically like, hey, what's happening here? How we doing? We're not doing great. We're all dying. And we need to get off this island. So they load up with him and they head back to England. The guy who was the artist and the historian of the expedition in 1585, John White, explains to Raleigh, look, if we're going to do this, we've got to do three things. Number one, we've got to go back with families. Number two, we've got to go back with an appropriate amount of supply. And number three, we cannot go back to Roanoke Island. We must go north to the Chesapeake Bay, because they know the Chesapeake Bay is there. They didn't do any of those things. All right? Well, they did bring the families, but they didn't bring enough supply, and they landed right back where they were before. And almost immediately, their only ally, Manio's tribe, is attacked by the settlers, so now they have no one. They also got there in August. It's not a good time to arrive. What can they not do? They cannot plan anything, nor did they know how to, because a lot of the seeds they bring from Europe just don't take, just doesn't work out. So they're starving. John White's granddaughter will be the first English child born in America. Her name, Virginia Dare, Dare County, North Carolina. That's the namesake. A week later, he heads back to go get resupplied, and when he gets back, right, he goes back. Still, it takes 2.5 months to get back. We're now moving in 1588. Why is he not able to come back till 1590? War. Very good. War with Spain. He doesn't come back for 3 years. And when he gets back, they're gone. The word Croatan is the only clue that is left behind carved into a palisade at the fort. He arrived at another bad time. He arrived in August. Does anybody know has anybody ever been to Hatteras before? That's Croatan. So he can't go south to search for them because what's rolling up the coast that requires them to leave quickly? A hurricane. A hurricane's rolling up the coast. So they head back because they're like, if we don't go, we're going to be stranded. We're going to have nothing. So we don't know what happened. Now, in the 1930s, this is interesting. A group of people found these tablets that were believed to have been carved out by the survivors. They found tablets in North Carolina, South Carolina, and in Georgia. And these tablets went on display in the early 1940s, and a group of archaeologists were like, oh, those are not real. They were total fakes. And the reason that they did that was it was a group of people trying to make money in the 1930s during the Depression, and it was like a total hoax. Yep. Because the engravings had been done, they figured out that the engravings had been done in the 1930s and not hundreds of years before. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the whole thing was debunked, and we still don't know where they went. Did they go north? Did they go west? Did they try to go back to England? Did they go south to Hatteras? We just don't know. It is one of American history's greatest unsolved mysteries. For you murder mystery fans out there. All right. How am I doing over there? Beauty. Love it. England on the eve of the empire. So, what you all need to understand is the 1500s, like by the time we are basically think about the entire era of the House of Tudor, like the Henrys to Elizabeth, the population of England is going to double. All right? It's like just a mushroom boom of population. The Crown and Parliament during this period of time created laws in which private land was fenced in, right? So this prevents the poor from having farmable land in England. And most of the land was controlled by the crown and nobility. Furthermore, the woolen districts, a cornerstone to the British economy, for a variety of reasons went into decline. The rivalry with Spain, the economy, supply and demand. I mean, keep in mind, all this wealth coming out of the New World isn't, at this point in time, necessarily going into the pockets of the British, unless they're like pillaging and plundering on the high seas. So the lack of land and the lack of jobs ultimately led to the rise of debtor prisons. But debtor prisons don't serve any, they don't necessarily fix a problem because now you're just housing a bunch of debtors and feeding them. So the debtor prisons are going to be a perpetual issue as we moved into the 1600s, even into the 1700s. We're going to talk more about debtor prisons as we move forward. We discussed this briefly before. The policy of primogeniture. This was almost universal in Europe. And what it meant was the oldest born son of a family would receive either the wealth or the debt of a family upon the death of his father and mother. And sorry, ladies, what would happen to women if they received that wealth? If they got married, exactly, they would seize control to the husband, right? So this is where you start to see a lot of people looking to the ocean. Okay, I don't have a lot of prospects here. Maybe I just need to roll the dice and see if I can carve out a life in the New World, because I don't have a shot at owning land in England. This also leads to the rise of the joint stock companies, where people are going to put their money, invest their money into it with the hopes that they're going to find what?
Money. Land.
Gold, right? And land, but especially gold. The joint stock companies, obviously, the model for the success of a joint stock company was pretty much dominated by the Dutch, so the English go in this direction as well in the early 1600s. So you can see in this graph the crazy population boom that occurs in a 100-year period throughout the 1500s in England. That picture of Smithfield Woolworks, that was taken in the 1800s, but that was one of like the leading woolworks industries. But like these woolen districts, when they fell on hard times, this is like a three-pronged problem, because it's not just the industry itself, but it also involves what other groups. Where are you getting the wool from? Farmers. And who's transporting and selling the wool? Or merchants. Very good. So it will affect the wool district itself, merchants, as well as farmers, and this is where we start to see some high rates of unemployment. How am I looking?
2 minutes, 30 seconds.
Beautiful. Okay, so this is where we pump the brakes today, the golden age of piracy. This is, the golden age of piracy is mainly broken down into three parts. The buccaneering period, which is mainly pushed forth by the British and the French, and their main focus was to dial in on Spanish and Portuguese gold and silver coming out of the Caribbean, or coming out of South America and Central America. Also, other bases of operation in the buccaneering period, Florida and the Outer Banks, right? Like Nag's Head, we're all familiar with that. It gets its name from the pirates because they would put a lantern on the head of a horse, and they would have ships get off course and run aground and rob the ships. Tampa Bay, football fans, what's the mascot? Buccaneers. Tampa Bay was a nest of pirates. They actually have a huge pirate festival down there called Gasparilla. It's on my bucket list one day. I'm going to hit it up. Where are my pirate people at? Hey, all right. Our mateys. So, moving right along, we have the pirate round period. The pirate round period occurs at the turn of the century. And these are like more of your like long distance voyages. They're not just focused on gold and silver. They're now also focused on other materials like what? Good. And tobacco, right? Cash crops. Excellent. Okay? And then this last period in the Golden Age is known as the post-Spanish succession period. This is where like a lot of our really, really famous pirates come about, like this guy right here. Arr! Blackbeard, very good. Edward Teach, okay? So, colonial powers, regardless, French, Spanish, Portuguese, British, Dutch, you name it, they all had to deal with this pirate problem during this whole period of time. All right? Did I go too quick on that? Is everybody good? Yes. I love it. All right. So check it out. Our Métis, Blackbeard. This is crazy. Blackbeard's become, a celebrity in the pirate world, right? He was initially a lawyer by trade. Then he got involved in the naval scene during Queen Anne's Wars. And then when those wars came to a conclusion, he got himself involved in piracy. He was working with some other pirates. And then he got his own operation, his own boat, Queen Anne's Revenge. In this last period of piracy, they start to lay siege to cities and small towns that were either in the Caribbean or along the Atlantic coast. That's why he set up his operation on a little island many of you have probably visited. Has anyone ever gone to Ocracoke, right across from Hatteras before? That's where he was. That's where he will also meet his demise, because the Virginia governor and a detachment of sailors and Marines from the British Royal Navy are going to track him down, they're going to kill him, and they're going to decapitate him, and they're going to put his head on the mast of the boat. But what's nuts here is that when we think about pirates, we typically think about pirates in this sense of oh, these guys did this forever. But most pirates had a really short career. They either got out before they got caught, or they got caught and they got killed. So here's a question for you. About how long was Blackbeard's pirate career?
10 years.
10 years, 8 years, 15 months. Not even 2 years was this guy pillaging and plundering on the high seas. But he did some really major things. He laid siege to Charleston, South Carolina. That's big, right? The guy totally blockaded the town. So he did some larger than life things that have allowed him to have this notoriety hundreds of years later. So that's all I got for you today. I hope you learned something. We're going to get into Jamestown when I see you next. Jamestown. All right.